So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! The Detroit Lions currently rank 7th in the NFL in available cap space going into the 2024 offseason. They sit currently at $50 million, which gives them the 7th most cap space in the NFL to spend on free agents and, of course, throughout the draft and remainder of the offseason. The Detroit Lions yesterday made a big announcement to cut veteran safety Tracy Walker as a cap casualty to save just over $4 million on the cap. Now that officially puts the Detroit Lions right over that $50 million. Officially, they have $50,300,000 in the bank, and that puts them in a really favorable situation for the offseason going forward. But Tracy Walker, unfortunately, may not end up being the only cap casualty because the Lions can go from having about $50 million all the way up to $63 million, putting them well within the top 5 of NFL teams in cap space to spend and potentially be making a massive push and going all in this offseason to try to capitalize and go for a Super Bowl. So with that being said, we're going to take a look at the 3 other candidates today that could either be restructured or just straight up released by the Detroit Lions in order to open up some cap space and really make it a favorable situation for the Lions going forward. Now, the first player we're going to talk about is a player that we actually ended up talking about yesterday, and that is going to be John Cominsky, the third-year defensive tackle for the Detroit Lions, who over the last couple of years has been a big part of the Lions defense, has been a player that does a lot of the dirty work, has been a player that takes on a lot of the double teams, a player that is really, really strong in run support, and a player that has really embodied the identity that Dan Campbell has wanted to build. He got a new contract last offseason to come back for 2 years, I believe $8 million. And this year, he just wasn't nearly as productive. Coming off of a 4-sack season on a very limited role in 2022, a lot of people thought that John Cominsky could repeat and at least have 4 to 5 sacks in 2023. Unfortunately, he really took a step back. Had just 2 sacks, was still impactful for sure, still made some big plays, but was nowhere near as good or as impactful a player as he was a season prior. And over his last 2 years in Detroit, he's been pretty good. He's had 6 sacks on his 2 years. He's had 7 tackles for loss, 20 quarterback hits, a forced fumble, and 4 passes defended. But the Lions' depth just really hasn't been there at the edge rushing position, and it's a position I think the Lions really do need to address this offseason. And I think for $5 million, or for what officially would be $4.6 million saved by John Cominsky, you could go out and get a player that'll, instead of getting you 2 to 4 sacks, could get you 4 to 6, 6 to 7, right? A guy that can go out and be a really good rotational pass rusher, a player that could do everything John Cominsky does, but also potentially get to the quarterback a little more reliably. And I do think for about $5 million, there is a really good chance that John Cominsky either gets restructured, which I think is far more likely, as again, I think he really embodies what they like to have in Detroit. I think he's a really good run defender, but if you're paying him $5 million, he needs to get home more than twice a season. He needs to get more pressure on the quarterback. He needs to get more sacks and make more impactful plays. And I think for $5 million, you could go out and get more of a middling tier pass rusher, right? You could go out and you could get that Yetur Gross-Matos that could be more impactful. You could go get the, AJ Epinesa, who would, I think, be an upgrade over John Cominsky. There is options that I think would help the Detroit Lions be more impactful in the pass rushing game. And yes, this would leave the Lions severely depleted at the edge rusher position. That would essentially lose 4 of their 6 edge rushers from last year and potentially 5 of their 7 if you include James Houston being a potential free agent. But when you consider the fact that those 5 players combined for 7 sacks this year, I think it's pretty clear to say that the depth and rotation of that defensive line needs to be changed. And I think that there's a good chance they attack edge rusher hard in both free agency and the draft. And I think that John Kaminsky very well could either end up being very bottom of the roster, if not off the entire thing completely. Another player that I think could potentially be on the move from this defensive line is a second or third year, even second round defensive tackle, that being Levi Onwuzurike. Now, the Lions played Onwuzurike really early in the season, and then for a large stretch, he kind of was a healthy scratch for a lot of the season. And then late in the season, about the last 3 to 4 games of the regular season going through the playoffs, he once again was a rotational pass rushing piece and was brought back on to be a rotational pass rusher. Now, Levi, I thought actually was a very underrated player for the Detroit Lions this year. I thought he had quite a few really good pass rushing reps, had a sack on the year, I believe had 2 tackles for loss, was not super impactful, but is also on the last year of his rookie contract. So he's not taking up an extreme amount of cap space. He's not breaking the bank. He's not forcing the Lions' hand in any financial way. But I do think a player like Levi Onwuzurike, who never really lived up to the hype coming out of Washington, who never really has had the ability to stay healthy or stay consistently impactful on the defense, could potentially be up for grabs. And the Lions would save about $2 million cutting him to save cap space, which isn't a ton, mind you. It's not necessarily going to break the bank. It's not necessarily going to, save them from some kind of financial deficit, but those $2 million could very well go to a different defensive tackle or be added on to the defensive tackle contract of somebody that could be more impactful and could be more of a regular presence on the defensive line. And it might not be the end all be all, but it could be a nice incentive. It could be a nice bump that allows the Lions to offer $2 million more to, say, a Grover Stewart, to a Javon Kinlaw, to a veteran defensive tackle that would, again, improve the defense, and you would be upgrading the position and allowing a little bit more flexibility through that cut. Now, Levi, through his 2 years in Detroit, he's going in, I believe, to his 3rd season this year. He's had just 2 sacks, just 3 tackles for loss, 3 quarterback hits, and 2 passes defended. He's had some really good moments on the field, some really good pass rushing reps, some really good pressures, even a couple really nice quarterback hits, but he just has not been consistently impactful enough, especially for a second-round selection. And I think that if you were to give him up, I think if you were to cut him, you could save that $2 million and put it towards somebody that, again, could be more consistently impactful. I think that this move is less likely to happen. I think the Lions really like Levi Onwuzurike, and of course, his cap hit isn't anything extreme. I think there is an opportunity that if they need a couple extra $1 million, if they need that $2 million to really find and really secure a signing in free agency, I think he would be the first player to look at and say, hell, he's not a guy that's really been here. He's not a guy that's really been impactful. And although I think they'd love to keep him, I think he'd be one of the first guys on the chopping block if things got tight and they really needed that money. Now, the last player on the list is not a player that in any way is going to get cut this offseason. This is not a player that will not be on the roster. This is a guy that will be starting for the Lions next year, but could potentially be up for restructuring his contract. And the Lions very well may be asking for a little bit of their money back. Cam Sutton was a big-time free agency signing for the Lions last year. He is somebody that signed a 3-year, $33 million contract and was somebody that a lot of Lions fans really thought could be the cornerback one. Through the first month to month and a half of the season, Cam Sutton was fantastic for the Detroit Lions, but down the stretch, he struggled quite a bit versus wide receiver ones. Justin Jefferson gave him a hard time. Mike Evans gave him a big trouble. Puka Nacua had a lot of trouble on Cam Sutton. He was able to get a lot of yards and a lot of big plays on Cam Sutton. And although Cam Sutton came through and had a couple big plays throughout the playoff, although he came through and had a couple nice pass breakups and started games actually relatively well, down the stretch, it was a big concern of whether Cam Sutton could be the cornerback one. Now, there's going to be people saying, well, Cam Sutton just signed a massive contract last offseason, so having him restructure it wouldn't really be ideal or wouldn't really be very orthodox, but it's not as though the Lions haven't done this before. Charles Harris last offseason, just 1 year removed from signing a really big contract to remain on the Detroit Lions, restructured his contract down to just $1.5 million as a hit against the cap, so the Lions could go out and sign some bigger free agents and make a push for the playoffs. We all saw how that ended up. I'm not saying Cam Sutton necessarily will get restructured. Again, the Lions aren't in the biggest financial need, so I don't think there's a need to necessarily restructure Cam Sutton. But if you take his pay bump down from, I believe he's guaranteed $12 million this year to about 9 or 8 this season, I believe, is what over the cap had him at on a restructure. Push a little money down the road, take a little money back. I think you could restructure him to about $8 to $9 million a year, which saves you some cap space and would open up, according again to over the cap based on the kind of structured restructure that they have put up, would save the Lions about $7 million without having to give up on Cam Sutton while still keeping him as the cornerback too, still paying him $9 to $10 million a year. And you would have the Detroit Lions sitting at $63 million against the cap, putting them as the fifth most effective cap space going into free agency this year. For a team that has to re-sign roughly 20 to 30 free agents that are leaving the Lions, as well as wanting to bring in a couple of impactful players to bring in and be impactful and add on to the roster, the Lions need some money. The Lions are going to likely, they have 31 active free agents. They are likely going to re-sign roughly 15 to 20 of them, which again, even if you re-sign all of them to $1 million a year deals, which isn't going to happen, that's still $20 to $22 million that you're not going to have. Plus the draft is another likely 10. So that does leave the Detroit Lions a little bit tight on cap space. So they want to open some stuff up. I think these are the three most likely candidates to change their contracts or potentially get cut. I think it could open up a lot of possibilities and really open up some flexibility for the Detroit Lions down the road. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below what you would do with these contracts. Would you want to see the Lions open up a little more cap space? Would you like to see the Lions let go of a couple of these players in order to do so? Or do you think it's more likely they keep on to these players and better for the organization overall? I'd be very curious what you guys have to say. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.